We have Mr. Lamin Manneh, UDP Deputy Administrative Secretary for External or Foreign Affairs and the Diaspora, who, as announced earlier, led a UDP delegation to a meeting with the EU ambassador. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Manneh.
Thank you very much, Ajit.
What more can you tell us about the significance of the meeting you had with the EU ambassador yesterday?
Thank you for having me on your program this morning. The meeting is part of a whole array of consultations we are having with the diplomatic community in the country. And as a loyal and responsible opposition, we talk to all the parties and all the partners of the country. The development partners are key in what the country does in its efforts to develop the country. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us to talk to everybody and to make sure that they understand what the vision and mission of the United Democratic Party is. We are a responsible opposition, a loyal opposition that intends to come to power through the ballot box, rule this country, or run this country rather, not rule because we've had people ruling it and we don't want that to happen again, run this country based on democratic principles, cooperation with our development partners, and proper utilization of the resources that are put at the disposal of this country by the development partners for the development of the country. We have seen very many unfortunate situations in the recent past, and that has to stop. This country has to properly utilize the meager resources it has, which are complemented by resources from the international community. We must properly use those resources. And to do that, we have to reassure the development partners that we are a responsible and loyal opposition that is intending to come to power through the ballot box as soon as possible. The assurance will make them comfortable with the development prospects of the country.
Who initiated the talks?
The talks were initiated by the UDP because after our Congress in Janjanbureh, we decided that we are now going to engage the diplomatic community to discuss with them our vision for this country, our drive to change this country for the better, our drive to bring in a responsible government which will reassure the diplomatic community and all the development partners which put their taxpayer resources at the disposal of the country. So we needed to do that to reassure them that we are not what some people want to make others believe, that we are an irresponsible organization, a violent organization, a partisan organization. We want people to see what the UDP is. A loyal opposition that has been in this country since 1996, that has fought for the development of the Gambia, that has fought for the rights of the Gambian citizens, but through democratic means, which has always shunned violence, which has always shunned undemocratic change. The past presidential elections, I think, is testimony to that. We saw what happened. We did not agree with the results, but we went to the courts. We did not go to the streets. We are showing the world who we are, and we want to be seen for what we are. That is why we are engaging the diplomatic community.
What are some of the things important to the UDP you probably raised with the EU ambassador that are not captured in the press release you heard me read out earlier?
Well, I think most of it is captured, but what we want to underscore is the desire to ensure political and economic stability of this country, because you cannot develop a country without political and economic stability. And we have been accused of all sorts of things. Yet we are the party in the opposition which is claiming every day that the Gambia has to remain stable, that change has to be democratic, that change has to be through the ballot box. But for that also we need free and fair elections. We need a truly independent in the Electoral Commission. We need to ensure that only Gambians vote in Gambian elections. We need to ensure that the results proclaimed are the results of the ballots, are the results which came out of the wish and the desire and the determination of the Gambian people. We cannot have the national results diluted by mass registration of non-Gambians. We did see that before. An election petition did put that on paper. Unfortunately, we didn't have it examined. But these are the sort of things we need to ensure. You see, to ensure that democratic dispensation continues in the country, to ensure that the country remains stable, we have to ensure transition, proper transition to democratic means, which means allowing the citizens their fundamental rights of choosing who governs them, choosing who runs the country. That has to be ensured.
What did the EU delegation make of some of your concerns? How did it respond?
Well, basically, the EU delegation was very glad to hear that the UDP is a responsible and loyal opposition that does not intend to do anything to burn this country down, that does not intend to engage or support any undemocratic change, that does not intend to be used by anybody for anything that is not democratic. They were happy to hear that we are on the side of the law, that we have always been the people who have claimed that the rule of law must prevail, and we have done everything to ensure that the rule of law prevails. They were happy to hear that, because you see, these people put, as I said, hard-earned tax dollars and euros at the disposal of the country. So that money must be used for development. It cannot be used in ways that are anti-democratic. It cannot be used in ways that are not going to be consistent with the development of the country. Because if you put money, for a long time I was in the other side, I was in development finance community, African Development Bank. When you put money into a country, you want to ensure that that money produces incremental benefits for the country. Whatever you build will be a foundation for something better to come tomorrow. If you're going to burn that down through undemocratic means, through violence, you're not going any further. You want to make sure that what you do is a foundation for better development. And that is what the development partners want to see, that the money they invest in the country is used to enhance the situation of the Gambia. All our people who are going through the back way and going to be refugees and other sorts of people in the European Union, etc., they could be staying here if you give them means of survival in this country. If we manage our resources properly, we hear of all sorts of mismanagement of funds through every single audit report. If those monies were recovered, if people are made to account for what they did wrong, and that money is used for the development of the country, our youth would not have to risk their life to the back way. The European Union would not have to put up with all of the difficulties they're having today with some of our young folks out there. Everybody wants to stay in your country and develop. Let us give the youth the possibility to develop in the country here. Let us put the resources at their disposal instead of having them mismanaged by people who are not in any way contributing to the development of the country. We cannot accept that.
Talking about
happy to hear that.
Talking about funds, did you ask for any financial support during the meeting?
No. The UDP is not asking for any financial support. We are sharing ideas. We are sharing ideas about development. We are sharing ideas about our vision, our way forward, and we support funding for this country. Because I want to make that clear, nobody should believe that we went there to stop funding for this country. No. We support funding for this country, and the ambassador did tell us that a lot of funding is coming to the country on the different phases, on the different programs, and we welcome that. What we do wish to see is that those funds are used for the purposes for which they were intended, the development of the country, not individual development, that they are used to take this country forward. All the development partners contributing to this country want to see this country develop because we have a common stake in stability everywhere in the continent and beyond.
Are you planning to have similar engagements with other diplomatic missions, including the U.S. Embassy, UK
Absolutely.
High Commission and ECOWAS, and other diplomatic representatives as well?
Absolutely. It's a series of meetings, as I said. We have been in touch with most of the diplomatic missions in the country, and we do hope and believe that they will be sensitive to our stance, and they will be talking to us, And we will be moving forward our agenda, explaining to them what we intend to see happen in this country, how we intend to see the development of this country move forward. We want to contribute to the development of this country in a way that is consistent with the desires of the Gambian population. We want to see free and fair and transparent elections in this country, which means, as I said, an independent, a truly independent electoral commission, and proper electoral process from the time of registration to the proclamation of results. And for these upcoming elections, the local elections, we are going to ensure that. We are going to be present in every polling station. We are going to have our own collation centers. We are going to have our command center to ensure that what IEC publishes is exactly a reflection of the vote on the ground. And we did discuss it with the diplomatic community, and we discussed it with other people when we meet them, because that is the only way to ensure stability and free and fair and transparent elections in this country. And the UDP is going to see to that. We're going to make sure that the Gambian people have their rights respected in the country.
And finally, why is having strong diplomatic ties seemingly so important to the UDP, and why so now?
Because we want to ensure that the diplomatic community understands what we stand for, what we are fighting for. We are not political adventurists. We are people who believe in democratic transition, democratic change. And they should understand that if and when the UDP comes to power, which is rather when the UDP comes to power, not if, because I think everybody in the country knows the support the UDP has, and the amount of frustration that is piling up in this country because of poor governance and the rest. When the UDP comes to power, through the ballot box, we intend to develop the country on the basis of democratic principles and economic justice. So the diplomatic community has to be comfortable with that. They should know where we stand. I think they do, but it doesn't hurt to remind them of our stance, so that when we want to hit the ground running when we get to power. We have already contacts with the diplomatic community. They know what we stand for. They know what we're advocating. They know what we have in store for this country's development. We are determined to take this country from this stage to the next stage of development.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Manneh.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
I was talking there to Mr. Lamin Manneh, UDP Deputy Administrative Secretary for Foreign Affairs and the Diaspora. And finally today, the death of Australian Cardinal George Pells is being felt at the center of the Catholic Church. Senior clergy in the Vatican have been wrestling with the shock death and reflecting upon his religious life. But what will be Cardinal George Pells' lasting legacy? And what does his death mean for the Catholic Church? Paul Collins is historian and former Catholic priest. He says Pell was key to shaping the way the church functioned, and therefore his death will leave a void for particularly the conservative faction of the Catholic Church. Noel Debian is editor of the ABC's Religion and Ethics unit. He believes Cardinal Pell was so well known that he became symbolic of all the things that are wrong with the church. They spoke to the ABC's Hamish MacDonald.
To both of you, welcome.
Thank you, Amy.
Very interesting perspective from the Bishop there. Noel, what does Pell's death mean for the Catholic Church here in Australia?
I think it's fair to say that it leaves a void because Cardinal Pell, quite apart from that pastoral work that Shane McKinley was just talking about, he was quite key to all sorts of management and policy issues, whether that's the selection of bishops, the influencing of bishops. It's not that he always got his way, but he was quite key to shaping the way the church in this country and elsewhere was formed too, because he was on what was called the Congregation of Bishops. And so he's gone. Benedict XVI has gone, and you see the loss of two significantly conservative and influential people all in one go. And so I think what I'm hearing from people is that there's a certain void. There's a sort of, wow, how could he be dead? That's what I'm hearing.
Noel, amid all of that, there are countless people listening this morning, texting in saying, how can he be celebrated in this way? What is the accurate response to those questions?
Well, again, Bishop McKinley and others have said this, that it depends on what your engagement with the church was and what your experience of him was. And I think it's fair to say, as Father Frank Brennan has argued and others have argued, that there was an element of scapegoating. Bishop McKinley just said then he sort of became the face of the church. That's true. He was so well known that he was seen as sort of the one leading figure that stood out. And I think that after we've been through such a horrific process with the Royal Commission, we're talking about 4,500 victims alone of Catholic clergy and religious, that he has ended up taking on in a symbolic way all of that. And that's quite apart from his own, faults and failings in this area. But I'm also, really conscious, as Frank Brennan points out, the High Court was really clear in its decision about the things that he was charged with. Now, that's not to say there wouldn't be other things to talk about, but I think that he became symbolic of all of the things that were wrong in the church, particularly to do with abuse and the treatment of survivors and their families. And that means that he is seen with a great deal of emotion, and I've seen visceral hatred on social media for him, and I understand it because I've interviewed these survivors many times over the years, their families, their friends, and there is real distress and there's real anger, and it's pinned on him, I think.
Paul, pinned on him, scapegoated, is it in part because he put himself at the forefront and he was front-footed in prosecuting the position of the church on church-related matters, but also social issues that affected people beyond the church?
Yes, look, I think I both agree and disagree with Noel. I certainly agree, and I also agree with Bishop McKinley, that Pell set out to place the Catholic Church at the centre of the debates that he thought were important within Australian society. Most of those debates did tend to centre around gender issues. The role of women in the church, the whole question of gays and gay marriage, all of those kind of social questions that we're trying to still sort out in many ways within Australian society, and we are developing what secular society sees as a more compassionate society. Pell came from the point of view that the Catholic Church has the absolute truth. It was revealed to it by Christ. There is no departing from that. It's a bit like Shane McKinley said, we do what the coach says. And he set out to be the public face of that confrontational church. Now, I think that the time has that, in a way, and this is where I perhaps partly disagree with Noel, I think the time of that church is past. We're now in a very different situation, and Catholics in Australia are a post-Christian minority, where and even as a post-Christian minority, we still only have possibly about 10% of our Catholic people on the census actually attending Mass on any regular basis. So I think, yes, he became the lightning rod, but I think it was a seriously mistaken stance for the Church to take.
Paul, was he, do you think, a bit authoritarian?
Oh, well, very, very much so. Yes, I mean, I had an interesting experience with him on one occasion. He attended a lecture that I gave, and I must have made some vague reference to the Trinity, or to the doctrine of the Trinity, the three persons in one God. And he somehow suspected that I was heretical, so I wasn't the full dollar on it. And he questioned me very, very carefully afterwards, and I was able to satisfy him that I was truly orthodox. And he went away quite kind of satisfied with that. Yes, he was a man who demanded that you toe the line, especially if you were a Catholic, that you towed the line, you did what you were told, and in that way you'd be saved. But unfortunately, that's not the church of the future.
Noel, I was listening to your broadcast in the very early hours of this morning talking about the future of the Catholic Church. I think Bishop Shane McKinley's name was referenced in terms of what the future might look like. What is the shape of Catholicism after George Pell in this country?
It's an interesting question, and again, I agree with Paul on the shaping of the church, that in many ways George Pell represents a type of church which many wanted to move on from. And I would say that, by the way, Shane McKinley is not of exactly the same cloth. He's not cut of the same cloth as George Pell. He represents a more progressive, a more consultative type of bishop. And he distinguished himself in the plenary council in the national church meeting that happened. And he was noted by everybody, Shane McKinley, as, somebody new, but not typical of the sort of bishop, say, that Pell would have chosen. If you were looking at those who Pell influenced, look at Melbourne, the Archbishop of Melbourne, look at the Archbishop of Sydney. These were proteges of George Pell, and they form a type of Catholic Church which I think Paul is saying this current Pope is trying to steer perhaps not towards that at all, in fact away from it in terms of consultation, representation, the role of women, being more understanding of gay and lesbian people, the sorts of things that people find the church intolerant of. And that church, I think, is more represented now with the loss of George Pell, who was, as I say, a shaker and a mover, and who did try to influence these personnel and leaders and shape it that way. So I think you're looking at a church which may be more aligned to what the current Pope wants, actually, and George was not a clear supporter of him, I've got to say.
Noel Debien, Paul Collins, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Hamish.
And that will be all for